Hello and welcome to Bowtrek. Tonight, me and Fatheree from Trek will be talking about What We Left Behind. It's the Deep Space Nine documentary directed by Ira Bear and David. What's that guy's name again, Steve?
Zapone
Oh, Zappone. Yeah, that's right.
or
So,
Zapone, maybe.
Zappone, yeah. And this documentary includes fully remastered uh, Deep Space Nine clips. And to see that on the big screen, especially some of the battle scenes, was so epic. It felt like I was watching DS9, the movie, at some points.
It really
And
did.
yeah. And see, a lot of people don't realize back in the day when a TV show was filmed, you could actually go back and remaster all that from the negatives and make it look crystal clear because 35 millimeter film is able to capture a lot of detail. But then you got these shows and mostly sitcoms that were taped, and those things could like never be remastered. So thank God they did so much on film back in the day. And when you see it projected on the screen like that, uh, movies often when you watch movies back in the day before it was all digital, they were filmed in 35 millimeter film. So it's almost like the experience I had watching The Best of Both Worlds in the theater when that was released here. Except it was in four by three, so it kind of looked like a TV. But the fact that they do these clips in 16:9 is fantastic. What did you think of the clips? And tell us some of your favorite clips.
Well, what you just said there about the 16:9 aspect ratio, giving it that more cinematic widescreen look,
Yeah,
what I didn't know until today, what I just recently learned is that from at least from season 3 on, I don't know about the first two seasons because they changed their director of photography, but from season 3 onward, the entire show was shot so that it would be safe for a widescreen presentation.
oh,
You
really?
you see some of these older shows from the 90s that were shot for the 4:3 aspect ratio, and
Yeah,
sometimes they try to convert them to 16:9, and you see like weird stuff like in the Buffy the Vampire Slayer episodes that are available now online. You can see like the crew like standing outside of what would have been the shot. You see like
yeah,
camera guys and gaffers. So I was very surprised to learn that Deep Space Nine doesn't have any of that. They actually uh, shot everything so that it could be in 16:9, and that really makes me curious to see if we could potentially have a lot more of those shots that in the future that give us just a wider, literally like a wider look at that world of DS9. But yes, the stuff that they had remastered in there held up great. Personally, one thing I was kind of concerned about was Michael Westmore's fabulous makeup that he did on many Star Trek shows, but including Deep Space Nine, which DS9 has the most alien characters. And I was always curious if those makeup prosthetics would look as good in HD, especially on the big screen. And much,
yeah.
much to my delight, whenever there was an alien character on screen from the remastered footage, they actually look more believable as an alien now that you can see even more of the detail. The Jem'Hadar, the Cardassians, uh, the Ferengi, it looked really really good, and it makes me just want that hypothetical DS9 remaster even more now.
Yeah, I was surprised at how good the makeup looked. I mean, you really have to be looking, and the makeup's not perfect. Sometimes you can, with Worf or the Klingons or any alien makeup, you can see the separation or the creases. Uh, it's never perfect, but Deep Space Nine, I think, out of any other TV show that's ever existed, has had the most consistently innovative and best alien prosthetics ever seen on TV. And like you said, the Jem'Hadar look really cool. Like everything looks great. And Glenn Hedrick, he talks about how Discovery Klingons have to have the full face mask now because it has to work in HD and all of this stuff. But when you see this on the big screen, you could do that makeup now, update it just a little bit, and it would still look really good in 4K. Like, just imagine seeing Deep Space Nine in 4K. That would be so cool.
Yeah,
Um,
I mean, it really, really impressed me.
uh, the beginning of the documentary, there's a nice little song sung by the guy who plays Rom. I don't know his name.
Max Golden Chick or something like that.
Yeah, something like that. I know his
Golden
name's
Chick,
Max. I don't know. Yeah,
but yeah,
that
Max.
that was nice. And then, of course, at the end, when they're all singing together,
Yeah.
another original song for the documentary. I thought that was. I
Do you
didn't
know about
expect that at all.
Do you know about their Rat Pack group?
Yes,
The,
I know of it. Yeah,
yeah, they do
I've
like
never heard them
shows.
perform though,
Yeah,
and I was just. It was great.
they've done shows at Star Trek Las Vegas, and on the when I was on the Star Trek cruise last year, they performed, and it was Max, Armin Shimmerman, Casey Biggs, Jeffrey Combs. Those are the four that they used in the documentary. But they also had Vaughn Armstrong, who played Admiral Forrest on Enterprise,
Yeah, yeah,
and I think they had Robert Picardo and Ethan Phillips from Voyager with them, and they were a lot of fun to see live. And you can tell the actors have a lot of. I think they have as much fun just hanging out with each other now that they did back in, probably more now than in the old days, and they were having to work together, because back then they were at work. This is more of a
yeah,
almost like a hobby, I guess, getting to sing show tunes with your friends. So
yeah.
if you're into that, if you're like a theater person, like these actors are, they really have a good time, and it shows.
And Andrew Robinson and his little solo bits. Uh, there's a lot of comedy in this documentary that I didn't expect at all. I was laughing, like everybody in there was laughing the whole way through. Mark Alamio.
Oh my god, yeah,
I,
he
I don't
looks
know.
so old.
Oh yeah, that
Like, I know
he
the guy
does.
is like like 80 years old, but I mean, damn, he looked a lot rougher than I thought he would. But yeah, he was fun to watch. He was a little eccentric. Probably.
He's what you would call in Newfoundland a burnout.
Yeah, that is probably an apt description.
But he was so good as Goldacott, and I like how they say, like, at the time, Goldacott was the fan favorite, and now in 2019, it's Garrick. Uh, did you notice? God, what's his name? Chris from. He's on Irish Trekkie, Trek Collector.
Oh yeah, Chris T. Judge. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. It was cool to see him there, and then I saw a couple of familiar kind of YouTube faces here and there. Right, Mark Bernardin. I like that
Right.
they interviewed him.
Yeah, from Kevin Smith's podcast.
Mm. And you know what? They had these old clips of Avery Brooks in his doing his interviews.
Yeah, those are what cracked me up. Yeah, Avery Brooks is weird.
Approach him like he's a jazz singer and everything. But it wasn't like he was difficult to work with, but he was strange to work with the way people describe. But he seemed to be a very brilliant director. And they went into that whole bit about Far Beyond the Stars and how when he has that mental breakdown at the end that he actually kind of went method and like really kind of went there, right? And that's the second best episode of DS9 in my opinion because I love uh, trials and tribulations, and I like how they make fun of the fact that they never addressed that in the documentary during the credits.
Yeah, they do explain in the credits that there is going to be some bonus material
Yeah.
on the DVD or Blu-ray. So I'm looking forward to checking that out because I believe they're shipping me a Blu-ray for backing the project. That was one of the rewards I'm receiving is a copy of the Blu-ray. Although I don't think they've said when that will be, but I'm definitely looking forward to checking out the additional material.
Yeah. I was surprised at how fun the credits were. Like, yeah, him and Nana Visitor just like screwing around. Like, she has so much energy and she's so much fun to watch. And I mean, the interviews, these are people like you want to hang around with. They seem like a really fun bunch. And some of the more emotional stuff, like Nog talking about how he lost his leg and dealing with PTSD and how he had vets coming up to him talking about like his character, and he starts breaking down and all this, and you know,
Yeah, it's heavy stuff. Do you want to mention what the post credit scene was when they saved the best moment in DS9 history for the very end? Because I got
oh, when they're playing stupid riddle game, they're playing hopscotch or some shit.
yeah, it's from the episode. I believe it's called All the Way Home on in season one, but the Alamarain count to four.
Yeah, yeah, that was funny. Uh, did you? They had two. I just wanted to mention that there's two. I don't know, like 30-second to a minute, maybe battle sequences they show. One at the beginning and like one toward like the middle third part of the movie.
Yeah, I think that was some of the same footage, but that was a recreation of the episode "Sacrifice of Angels" from season six.
Yeah, like that's the type of thing that you need to show CBS and whoever you think would back the remastering of the series and say, look at how good this looks. If you put this out now, it'll be almost like a brand new show to some people because the sets, like the way they were able to film the show, you know how TNG has the 4:9 aspect ratio even in the HD transfer is because, like, you know, you said earlier about how if what happens is the information lost on the top and bottom of the picture is gained on the sides because uh, in reality the 4:3 frame that you're seeing in the picture is not the whole picture. It's significantly cropped on all sides, so you can actually manipulate it into the 16:9. But with TNG, the sets were so tight that if you saw something to the left or the right a little bit, it would be like wires and like the end of the set. But
Right.
Deep Space Nine, their set, that promenade, which is like the best set in science fiction history, that whole like even ops and like just the corridors and everything, it just seems like a real place that you can walk around in and have like these shots that you don't have to worry about the set ending on one end or the other. So it really lends itself to the wide picture, I believe.
Yeah, speaking of that promenade set, I've said for years that if I ever had access to a time machine and I could go anywhere in history, literally the first place I would want to go would be to the promenade set of DS9 back when the show was in production. And I just want to like walk around on that set and walk around on DS9. That's how big of a DS9 fan I am. That's the first thing I would want to do with a time machine. It's a gorgeous set, and another thing that makes it so great was that it was self lit, in
Yeah.
a lot of cases, which is kind of a common thing now with production design on TV.
Mhm.
But back in the '90s, that was a rare concept, and that the show does have a lot of dynamic lighting, but it often does have some darker sets that can look a little fuzzy in standard definition. And in a
Yeah.
lot of these HD remastered shots, we just see so much detail that for me, someone who's watched DS9, I don't know, like countless times, and I'll probably watch it countless more times. But just seeing these images I'm so familiar with, but with additional detail like that, it's just really mind blowing.
What did you think of the proposed or the idea or the pitch for season 8?
I mean, I'd watch that show, wouldn't you?
Yeah, I thought it was okay. Personally, I thought it was the weakest part of the documentary, but then again, like the weakest part is still pretty good. Like I didn't, I like the animation and the fact that they illustrated what they were talking about, but
Yeah. It's,
I just, if you're gonna come back with another season, what was it? Was it gonna be like a 20 years later thing? Yeah,
yeah, they said it would be set
because
20 years later, and there's actually somewhere
Molly has grown up, right, and she's a
right,
part of
yeah,
uh, Nog's crew.
yeah, and some of those graphics had actually said the year 2295,
95. Yeah,
which would be exactly 20 years after the seventh season of DS9. Strangely enough, that's also the year that the future scenes in the TNG episode "All Good Things" take place.
I think the basic idea of what they were talking about and what they were going for worked. For one thing, you wouldn't get Avery Brooks back. I just, I don't think there's no way he's coming back.
Yeah. But I mean, they kind of put that at like the end of
Yeah,
he
like
shows up.
they
You,
could
and
CG him.
you could kind of get away with that with like CGI or just to show like the back of his head or something, and you just
Yeah,
actually like have like another guy
yeah.
standing there, stand in for him or something. There's ways to get around it. It's kind of convenient that the one actor who'd be like the hardest to get back, he's the guy who was kind of written out of the show in the last episode. So I would definitely, I've said for a long time, I definitely would like to see it like some type of DS9 reunion. And I think it would be a lot of fun to see those characters again. But only here's the thing: is like I'm so happy with the show and how it ended. I only want to see it if I'm like super confident it's going to be really good. If it's just going to
Yeah.
be mediocre, I'd rather them just not even do it.
And in itself, it is what it is, and it doesn't need to continue. Really, it's nice to think about or to speculate about what they would have done beyond uh, season 7. Same thing with TNG. A lot of people like wonder, you know, what adventures happened between. If the movies didn't happen, what would the show be like if it continued and the movies didn't happen until like 1999 or something like that in the TNG era. And man, I always wanted a DS9 movie when I was a kid. I always thought that was going to happen. Like I just naturally just thought that was the process. And then Voyager was going to be next in the movies, and I was like, no,
Well, there was
no.
a plan for that. The guy who wrote Star Trek Nemesis, I'm trying to think of his name, something Logan, like the hell was his name? John Logan.
Okay, yeah.
He had a planned sequel to Star Trek Nemesis, which obviously didn't get made. But in his planned sequel, it was going to involve the Voyager, now back in the Alpha Quadrant, probably under the command of Captain Chakotay, DS9, the Enterprise under Picard, and the Titan under Riker. And it was going to be something that like established a huge crisis, and like all of these ships have to come deal with something. And he described it as kind of like the the term he used at the time was Justice League, but I think modern audiences would probably just say like the Avengers formula. We're basically your big team up crossover where you take all these different established characters from the different shows, and you just kind of combine them into one big Star Trek super team. But Nemesis did not do too well at the box office, and that idea never came to fruition. And who knows
Star
if they would have pulled it off. So
Star Trek Destiny is the closest thing I've ever, well, absorbed. I can't say that I've watched, or it's a book, obviously, I'm talking about. Just Tuvok's there, and Esri Dax, and Worf, and Picard. Everybody's like
yeah, and
working
flashback.
together, and it's a big crossover event, and it's that could have been something.
Yeah, but in all fairness, I think the books, which I barely scratched the surface of those books. I need to make time to read all three of them. But I don't know if the movies would have executed it as good as I'm told the books have.
Yeah, and you need these old writers from like Brandon Braga. Bring these people back. God damn it. Give them a job.
I would love to see Ira Stephen Bear and Ron Moore back on a Star Trek show. But
Yeah.
from what I understand, a lot of those guys that we like from the Berman era, a lot of them have contractual obligations now, and they wouldn't be able to commit to a Star Trek show. Is what I was told by. I think that came from Larry Nemenchek, actually. Doctor
Well, he's
Trek.
the author. He's an author, yeah.
Yeah, he was actually in What We Left Behind. He
Yeah,
showed up in
for
there.
like a second.
Yeah, yeah. Um, but he's a pretty good resource for the. He's an expert on Star Trek behind the scenes. But I don't know what would be the best hope for CBS to do something else with DS9. But if this documentary proves to be as big of a success as I hope it is, they definitely might have a motivation to look into DS9 and either remaster the series or possibly do like a little reunion mini series on CBS All Access. Maybe that's too corny, but TV shows used to do that. Like a show that got canceled 10 or 20 years earlier, they would do like a made-for-TV movie that was like a reunion story.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Picard is happening, but there's no other character from his TNG era that's appearing in it that we know of. So, like, as of now, they have no plans to bring back any of the old actors, but that could very well be like a secret that they can't.
Yeah,
Even if the actor was asked, they'd just be like, no, they'd have to lie and deny it, and people have lied, denied
like
straight up lied and just
an
said,
Enterprise bridge that you swear
yeah.
wasn't going
I was
to
just
be.
about I was thinking of that.
Yeah, they lied to us.
Tamara Devereaux went out of her way to say, "Oh, I didn't have anything to do with designing the Enterprise bridge. I wish I could have." And then she's like, 2 months later, "Yeah, I really had a great time doing that."
I don't
Well,
know.
I liked it. I liked the Enterprise bridge. It was pretty cool.
Yeah, no, I love it. I think that's one of the coolest looking Star Trek bridges I've seen on TV in a long time. But the Picard show, if it doesn't have any cameos or anything in the first season, I wouldn't be surprised if it turns out they were just saving it for season two, much like Discovery did with Pike and Spock on season two. They held off on those familiar characters in the first season, and then after everyone, all the new characters, the new ship was all established, then they brought in some of the familiar elements like the Enterprise, Number One, Pike, and Spock.
And wouldn't it be great if Picard was so successful that, and this documentary, which is like already adding to the already growing popularity of DS9, which is like an old show from the 90s. Like, it's crazy how many people are just discovering it now. And uh, the prospect of a continuation of DS9, just imagine if they rebuilt the sets as they were and they're still on that space station, and we went there again and it's a whole new generation. It's like DS9 the next generation. That would blow my mind. Like, I would, I'm actually into the first season of a rewatch of DS9 now, and I'm just trying to imagine what it would look like in HD and like the widescreen. And I would gladly rewatch every episode again, like I did with TNG when that was released.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big frequent rewatcher. I spend more time rewatching shows I like than watching new shows. I know we live in like the golden age of television, but I'm stuck in the past, I guess. I'm gonna. My point is, I'm gonna rewatch DS9 regardless. So I will certainly rewatch it if they were to remaster it in HD, and even if I needed to buy the Blu-rays to support it, I would I would do what I could to buy the Blu-ray releases or stay subscribed to CBS All Access or whatever I needed to do to support however they might distribute that show.
Yeah, I bought the first 2 seasons of TNG on Blu-ray, and then, Space started airing it in HD, and then Netflix had it on there, so I was like, "Okay, I don't need to buy anymore. Just watch it on Netflix." And that's great that they do that. Baywatch is now airing on the E network, fully remastered,
Oh wow.
crystal clear, and it's, like, really, really good looking, like, it looks old, but it there's a lot more detail, and, like, you can see, like, that thing where, you can see extras waiting to walk into the shot because before it was cut off.
Yeah,
And,
it's
Tracy
sort of a problem.
Tracy Coco from TNG is also in the first 2 seasons, I think, or the 2nd season. You see her a couple of times in the background, she's a lifeguard. She
Oh,
played Lieutenant J in,
yeah.
yeah, TNG.
Um,
Yeah,
yeah, like the frequent background character
yeah.
who
She was also in DS9 as a few aliens, I think.
yeah, and I think on Voyager as well.
Yep.
But I did not know that she had worked on Baywatch. But yeah, that's one of the problems. What you were saying, where you can see extras off screen.
Murder
That's like,
Murder, She Wrote, and Matlock are all these shows, like, from the back in the day are, like, it's just mandatory now. It's like they invest the money and they don't make money off of remastering Murder, She Wrote. But I
well,
know DS9 is more complicated because of the visual effects, and it's actually gonna be more expensive than, TNG because
the
of
CGI.
the amount of CGI, yeah.
Yeah, they'll either have to re-render the special effects, or there are ways to upscale that um, footage into HD. I don't know if you're aware of the fan project that's using the Final Fantasy VII software from when Squaresoft remastered Final Fantasy VII into
Okay.
HD. But they're using that software to uh, upscale DS9, and they've put out some clips of what they've done. If you look for it on YouTube, you can find it, and it
I've
actually
seen it,
looks
yeah,
good.
yeah.
Not quite as good as the stuff that they did with What We Left Behind, where they actually went back to the original film negative and scanned that in. That still looks better to me, but for a fan made project, it looks damn good.
But in, What We Left Behind, the first battle shot that they show, that's all CGI recreation, isn't it? Like, every
Yeah,
little bit.
and that's something else
And that looks so crystal clear, though.
that started as a fan made project. Also,
Yeah.
some fans online were I saw this like a couple of years ago. Someone had recreated some of those battle sequences, and I think Ira and the documentary people went to them to get that stuff for for the documentary. But they're, if I'm not mistaken, they're actually using the files that were used to create the special effects originally on the show. A lot of fans have access to a lot of that stuff.
Okay. Cool.
But yeah, I mean, if the fan made stuff is this good, and if there's this big of a demand for DS9 that they were able to raise all this money for the documentary, you know, they raised a shitload more money than they thought they were going to, and that's why they kept adding more stuff. Like originally, it was only going to be like 5 minutes of remastered footage, and well, turned out being closer to 20 minutes of remastered footage. Originally, they were just going to have the writers, you know, pitch us that story in the writers' room, but now they were able to hire someone to draw some rough animations of what it would look like, and you know, bring that aspect to life. They were able to do a lot more with that than initially thought, and that's why, you know, it kind of took them years to get it out, because they kept getting more and more money that they might as well, you know, well, if we just raise a little bit more, we can do something like remaster the rest of this footage, and there's such a appetite from the fan base. I don't know what the numbers would look like to CBS. I don't know if it would still look like small potatoes to them, but my hope is that people who are going to be streaming this documentary when it's on Netflix, people who are going to be ordering the Blu-ray, people who went to go see it in the theater tonight, I'm hoping that it adds up enough that it does get CBS's attention. Maybe that's wishful thinking. I don't want to get my hopes up too much, but I'm optimistic.
I've never ordered a Blu-ray in my life in the mail, and I'm gonna get this. Like this, this is a must-have. In my I just want to look at the clips again on my TV. I mean, uh, one last thing I want to get into is there's parts in the documentary where they talk about like just the grueling nature of the TV series and filming it, and 14 to 16-hour days, the actors in this makeup that irritates their skin and makes it feel like ants are crawling all over them, and just the sheer amount of discomfort and the amount of patience that I guess this cast had to have had back then is astounding. And they can all laugh about it now, but you know some of the funniest parts in the documentary are like people complaining about the makeup, like Renee Arbor Jonas. Is that how you say his name?
I have never been able to remember how to say his name,
And Armin
but
Shimmerman, and like uh and how that
Michael
whole
Dorn.
Michael Dorn, but how Renee was talking, or Ira was talking about how Renee took off his sweaty mask and like gave it to him,
Yeah,
and
no,
now Ira has it on display in his house.
yeah, that's funny.
Uh, Terry Farrell, I didn't expect that kind of like emotion out of her, and I didn't quite realize like the drama behind her leaving the show, and how she felt like she wasn't being heard and she was being neglected as a cast member.
Yeah,
Uh,
there's a lot more to that story, I think, just different things I've heard over the years. But I actually remember back in, I guess it was 98 when they announced that she would not be returning for the seventh and final season. And she was going to be on CBS's new sitcom, Becker.
Becker.
And I remember thinking, like, oh, that's really sad and disappointing that she wouldn't stick it out for one more year. And I kind of blamed the actress, but from what I heard from Terry Farrell herself, Rick Berman was kind of an asshole to her, and the people were not eager to negotiate with her when she tried to have a conversation about, sure, I'll sign on for one more year, but I'd like to get more money. Let's talk about this. Let's negotiate. And she said they were kind of dismissive to her and shut her down. And then Rick Berman gave her a lot of shit. And if it played out like that, I don't blame her for leaving. But at the time, I was definitely kind of disappointed.
Yeah, it's kind of sad. I mean, I feel bad for her, but I mean, it worked out because we got Ezra Dax, and
Right. It added to the lore a little
yeah,
bit. So
yeah, like we were aware of Curzon and going into Jadzia at the beginning of the series, and then she dies, and then we get Ezra, and I like Nicole DeBoer.
yeah, she's a fellow Canadian, I believe.
Yeah, she was in a show called Dooley's Gardens. It was filmed like I don't know, 10 minutes away from where I live. So she was here for a good bit filming that show. It was only one season, it got canceled. Every show that's ever been produced here, besides like a couple, get canceled like right away. But yeah, she's pretty cool. I talked to her on Twitter once or twice. She's very nice. And uh, one last thing, I just want to talk about Avery Brooks and the part of the documentary where they're talking about his hair and like how he wanted to have his, what was that show he was in before?
A Man Called Hawk, I believe.
Yeah, yeah, he was Hawk, and he had that shaved head and goatee, right? And that's kind of like the look he was comfortable with in his own life. And they're like, no,
He's maintained to this day. He
yeah,
still looks like that.
yeah, exactly. And how it gradually changes over to from the original Cisco look, and he looks, he doesn't look as badass as he does with the shaved head and the goatee. There's a reason why that Avery Brooks kind of likes that look, because it is him, and he becomes like the true Captain Cisco. Well, he wasn't a captain before, but he becomes the true Cisco in my eyes. I think it's season 3 where that happens.
Yeah, towards the end of season 3, he starts growing out the beard, and then in the first episode of season 4, he's bald.
Yeah, and they don't show a lot of these clips in the movie, the documentary, but the parts in the show where like he really like he's a scary guy. Like he's one of these people like you can just do him on. I think there's a video on YouTube somewhere of like you don't mess with Cisco or something like that, and it's just like him just telling people off constantly.
He is my favorite Star Trek captain.
Yeah, and uh, I like how they're interviewing people, and there's a little girl who's like, "I like the last 10 episodes," and Ira's like, "Oh, you mean the Dominion War?" And he looks at the camera like, "Oh, cool!" Like, it's such a well made and well put together documentary, and I just really had a great time watching it. I can't wait to watch it again.
Yeah, and I've heard you mention before that you had not watched it in a while, and that a lot of it's going to be new to you. So I'm kind of envious of you because I'm so like familiar with that show. I've seen it so many times that I kind of wish I could watch it through new eyes. But I'm curious to hear what you think. You said that you're in season 1 now. Like how deep into season 1?
Uh, 8,
Okay,
episode
like
8.
like halfway because it's only 20 episodes.
Yeah. Uh, the last time I watched DS9 through and through was over 15 years ago.
Yeah, so
I've
been a
watched a
while.
scattered episode here and there on TV, but
Mhm.
since I've had it on Netflix, I've gone through Voyager once, like a couple of years ago, and but DS9, only do like Trials and Tribulations or Far Beyond the Stars or that baseball episode, or like there's all these usually in the latter half of the series that I watch. I like Emissary. A lot of people don't like Emissary. I like that two-parter.
I think it might be the best Star Trek pilot.
Yeah, it is a
But
bit. Well,
part of my
uh,
enjoyment of it comes from being attached to those characters, knowing what I
yeah.
know from watching all 7 seasons. So it's hard for me to be objective about it, but I think it's a pretty cool setup for
When you were
the show.
when you were a kid and when you watched Emissary for the first time, did you find it like, what the hell is this? I don't understand. This is kind of boring. It's kind of
No,
cool.
I actually, because I had missed the episode when it originally aired, but I had been watching DS9 at some point. I started watching weekly, and they had released a bunch of the episodes on VHS, and I actually was able to buy that at the store, and because I wanted to see the very first episode. How did it get started? And I used to watch the shit out of that tape, and I kind of watched it too much that by the time I was like in high school, I had seen Emissary so many times that I kind of hated it. And so for a long time, I thought I didn't like the episode. And then when I was really trying to analyze it a year or two ago, when we did the Text Trek podcast on Emissary, um, I actually discovered that like, oh no, there's a lot to like in this episode, and it might be my favorite Star Trek pilot.
Yeah, like it's it's unlike anything you've ever seen in Trek before, but like you said, it's hard to be objective because if you're a lover of DS9 through and through, when you go back, you probably have a little more affection for the pilot episode than you would have when you first watched it.
Right.
And I love. Oh yeah, one of the things. Last thing I want to talk about here before I let you go, because I don't want to keep you too long. It's pretty late. The letters that the cast read from the trolls back in the day, and
Oh,
there's like cursing and swearing and stuff.
I remember hearing people complain about that show so much, and I loved DS9 when it was on the air, and I didn't have a lot of people around me who were really into Star Trek. So whenever I met someone, typically older people, no, I was a kid when DS9 was on the air, but I would meet like adults occasionally who liked Star Trek. If I tried to talk to them about DS9, they would tell me that they didn't like that one, and I always felt like the oddball for liking DS9. But now, if you go to any random Star Trek Facebook group or Reddit page, it's very typical for people to have DS9 as their favorite show.
My main complaint about DS9 when I was a kid was that it was like a soap opera, and somebody said that in the letter, and I laughed out loud, and I was the only one who laughed at that. I was like, "Oh,
So they actually said, as the space station turns. I remember that being a common complaint that when I would read like the Star Trek magazines and stuff, and like the letter forums, people would complain and call it a soap opera, and that was like the running joke was as the space station turns.
And that thing about people not liking Bashir, but like Bashir grows on people,
Yeah.
and by the end, like you love him. And that's the same thing that happened to me when I watched it. I didn't like Bashir at all. I was like, he was annoying, and they were talking about that in the documentary. I'm like, I can totally relate to that.
Every woman I've watched DS9 with has told me, like in the early seasons of DS9, they've told me that like, oh my god, I've gone on so many bad dates with guys like Julian fucking Bashir. But
Yeah.
yeah, they do add depth to them in the later seasons. Some people don't like um the secret reveal that they give the character, but it actually I don't know if you want me to say what it is on here in case people have not watched all of DS9, but um
Oh yeah, go ahead. He's genetically engineered.
yeah, he's a genetic augment.
Yeah.
But the fact that he's like a super intelligent human, if you know that watching the early seasons, there's so many little things where you can be like, oh, that makes a lot of sense knowing his actual
Exactly.
backstory. And that was an accident. They did not plan that out from the beginning, but it sure as hell lines up like they had.
And you get Kira Nerys and the complicated nature of her character and the fact that she was a terrorist. And in since we're as a viewer, we're supposed to hate the Cardassians. We can sympathize with her, even though she has like murdered probably countless people, uh, and how she evolves over the series, and how maybe you couldn't really do a character like that. Like in Discovery, how like one of the admirals is a Vulcan logic extremist. That doesn't fit in that timeline, I don't think. But when you get to the 24th century, like it's a little more complicated than, oh, you know are you like the Jem'Hadar or the who are the other guys? Who are the guys who are against Starfleet but they're ex-Starfleet officers?
Maquis.
The Maquis. Yeah, it's like we get into those areas. Didn't DS9 invent the Maquis, or is that
Um,
something in TNG?
no, so the Maquis were created for Voyager. The whole point of Voyager would be it's a ship stranded on the other side of the galaxy. That's like half
Okay.
Starfleet and half renegades, and they were thinking, well, how do we create like these cool badass renegade characters? And so they created the Maquis and introduced them on both DS9 season two. They came out on their first in the two-part episodes, the Maquis parts one and two, and then they also showed up on the next generation when they have Ensign Ro actually go undercover to infiltrate the Maquis, and she ends up defecting and joining them.
So yeah, so they were invented in TNG, right?
Well, they were shown on DS9 first, but a
Okay.
few weeks later they showed up on TNG. but the idea, the inception of the idea was for Star Trek Voyager. So really, you can say any of those three shows invented them. I guess you can make a case for it, but
Yeah. Uh, I thought of one more thing. There's a part in the documentary where they're checking off the boxes of what the show has accomplished.
yeah,
Religion and blah blah blah, and then they get to
sexual identity.
sexual identity or something like that. Yeah, and he's like, no, because they did do a lesbian kind of storyline in one episode.
Yeah, the
Or
episode.
he talked about Garrick. He's like, we all knew Garrick was gay.
I've been saying that for years. So, yeah, I'm thankful that they were so blunt and forward about that.
Yeah,
But I think that was kind of honest of Ira Stephen Bear to admit that they should have tried harder to push what we'd call today LGBT representation. Um,
yeah,
I don't know what they would have called it, back in the '90s, but he did say that for all we know, the studio would not have allowed us to do that, but he says he still should have tried, and so I think that was pretty honest. That I think the conclusion of that, when they decide not to put a check or an X on that box, but to put like a question mark, I think the conclusion that they come to is that they did put in an effort, but it was not as strong of an effort as they wish it had been.
yes, and for its slight shortcomings in that area, uh, it did do a lot for female representation in terms of characters like Jadzia and Kira.
Hmm.
And Nana Visitor mentions that when she read the character, it didn't read like a woman. It didn't have gender. There was no gender to the character. It was just she was what she was, and uh, not only like the diversity in cast and the fact that within the Trek universe you have this extremely diverse space station of different humans and different aliens and all this stuff, and it was able to jump into the serialized. I think they talked about the first three episodes of
Yeah,
season two,
yeah, that's the Circle trilogy that opens up season 2 of DS9.
and that's the first time they ever did like a three-parter in Star Trek history, and how like that kind of went against them. Like they took a lot of risks with this show that didn't seem to initially pay off, but they just kept going and going and kept to their artistic narrative integrity. And in retrospect, it's one of these shows that I think is more appreciated now than it was back when it was on the air.
Yeah, and that's something that I've noticed as someone who's kind of always been a DS9 enthusiast. I hate to be like all hipster and be like, yeah, I liked Deep Space Nine before it was cool, but I was always a advocate for this show, and I noticed it first started when the DVD box sets came out in 2002 or three. The show is released on DVD, and I
Yeah,
noticed that more people had started watching it that way. And then when it really hit was when it went up on Netflix
yeah,
several years ago, and it seemed like almost immediately after that. But I think you got to give some credit to the Kelvin timeline movies. I think having some new Star Trek movies on the big screen kind of got people to go back and watch the Next Generation, and then maybe check out DS9 and Voyager. But around that same time, DS9 got the biggest boost in popularity that it ever had.
exactly. Yeah. Uh, okay, we're gonna go, but I just want to say one more thing, and I want to ask you: pick two episodes of DS9 you would love to see remastered on a big screen,
On a big,
if it was possible.
it would probably be something that's pretty special effects heavy. So, oh, I know. The first one I'm going to say is The Way of the Warrior, because that's kind of a cheat. It's actually like a 2 hour episode that was the premiere of season 4,
Okay.
but it aired as one episode. That's where Worf comes in, and they actually have like some cool battles against the Klingons.
Cool.
So we'll go with The Way of the Warrior for one, and then what would be my second one? Um, they did show us some footage of Sacrifice of Angels, which is another like epic space battle episode. So
Yeah.
I might go with that, even though I feel like I could do something better because we've already with this documentary we've already seen some of that footage. So I'm just gonna say In the Pale Moonlight, even though it doesn't have a bunch of special effects or anything. Well, that's just considered to be such a classic Star Trek episode, such a great Star Trek episode, um, and I think it deserves to be showcased in HD quality as much as any other Star Trek story. So, The Way of the Warrior and In the Pale Moonlight.
Nice. Uh, I think I'm gonna watch In the Pale Moonlight because I can't remember that one. I'm gonna go and watch this episode that you're talking about.
Season 6, episode 19, I think.
Okay. Well, my two, pretty easy because they're my two favorite episodes.
Let me guess. They're going to be The Trials and Tribulations and Far Beyond the Stars.
How did you know?
Because I've just heard you mention both of those on here tonight. So
Yeah, it makes sense. Yeah, I mean,
yeah, I didn't want to pick either one because I was like, well, he's going to pick those. So
I would have loved to see like the full HD remaster of Trial and Tribulations, like the composite shots, like redone. But whatever. Uh, but they did show clips of Far Beyond the Stars, and it looks so good. It looks like a movie. Like that's the greatest thing about the HD. You don't realize that, like you said earlier, you don't realize like the detail and the color. Like they're just color correction, I guess, because the colors look way better to me anyway, and it just looks fantastic. And it actually looks like the way they film it looks like old timey stuff. Like it's got that kind of sepia tone to it, uh, and the natural lighting and the I don't know,
yeah,
it's
it really
great.
really makes you respect the cinematography that they were practicing on set 2 decades ago when they were actually shooting it.
And to think back then, they would, what they saw in the editing room, which is like the actual film, and what they see on TV, they're like, oh, they must have like wanted people to see like the full potential of the show, right? But now it's a possibility. So we'll leave it there. And I want to thank you, Steve, for joining me tonight. It was a great discussion. Can't wait to see the documentary again. And yeah, hopes for DS9 being remastered.
Yeah,
Um,
fingers crossed.
Anything you wanna plug before we take off?
Sure. Anyone out there interested in Star Trek movies? We are actually discussing all 13 Star Trek films weekly. We have the motion picture released yesterday, and Sunday we're releasing our podcast on the Wrath of Khan, and so we'll be continuing to dropping these all throughout the summer until we've covered all 13 movies. So by all means, if you're into that, be sure to check out Text Trek. And PJ, just want to say thank you for having me on board tonight, and it was a lot of fun.
And thank you for joining me. Until next time, live long and prosper.